Good evening, everyone. This is Jorge, and tonight we've got ourselves Joe Dewhurst, which is a very successful developer for GMT games, and also he's been designing his own game for a while now. And he has been the developer of British Way and Vijayanagara and a lot of other successful games. Now he's designing his own Pure Land, which will be the very next coin volume. And I've had the pleasure of working together with him for China War, which is the coin volume that will possibly be released very soon. So, Joe, the question that everybody wants to hear: where are we at China War? Are we close?
Yes, very close. So, thanks to your very hard work testing the solo mode, Jorge, we've made good progress on that. I know it's maybe not exactly what you wanted from a solo mode, but it's good and it's working, so that's fine. And we have that done. So I'm now just finishing off the exemplar play to teach people how to use the solo mode. And at the same time, we've been working with the artist Matthew Wallhead on the map and the counters and the cards and everything. Actually, today I just got an email with the counters. So that's the final thing other than the booklets. So we just need to get the booklets sent to the layout artist to do, then it's done. So yeah, hopefully sent to the printer pretty soon, and then early next year should be arriving.
Oh, that's very good news. And I wonder, we have mostly been focusing on designing the non-player factions, or to let other people understand what I mean is we've got a coin game which features 4 factions, and some factions may be possibly played by humans, and maybe we have some leftover factions for other players. So we have been designing how the bot factions or the non-player factions will be playing. So how do you feel about designing the bots? I mean, it's like, for me, it was a very fascinating experience that it feels almost like trying to imitate the human intelligence by trying to implement to the non-player how I would play the game, or how the game would, in most cases, be played efficiently. And of course, it is kind of a painful task sometimes, because you have to take into account all the different situations that might arise on the board and have the bot to adjust accordingly. While if you were a human, you would start thinking for yourself in the particular moment. But now we've got the mission of making this possible with a designed non-player like a bot, and this has to adapt to the situations in many different situations. So how does it feel for you after have developed so many?
So yeah, as you've seen yourself, it's a long process and it takes a lot of hard work. I think sometimes, so we have this kind of standard system with the cards and so on now, which was first designed for Gandhi by Bruce Mansfield and Jason Carr. Sometimes people think that we have this standard system, so it will now be easy, but that's not true at all. We have to take these tools and then redesign lots of parts of it for every single game. So I've done now People Power as well, and I did some for Fire in the Lake for the expansions. And also Red Dust Rebellion, which was just released. And each one is like a new project, and it takes a very long time. I think it's almost as much work as designing just a whole new game in some ways. And as you say, you need to try and think about how the player would react to each kind of situation, but you also need to make it simple enough to use that it's not going to take ages and ages for the player to make these choices for the bots when they're playing, because really what they want to do is their own turns. So there's always this trade-off between making it really realistic, really lifelike and good at playing the game, and then making it usable for the player controlling it, which is a hard balance to get right. And there's something else which you mentioned, like it will often end up behaving in ways like I would play, and that's why it's really useful to get someone like you to come and test it, because I get stuck in my own way of playing the game, and these things which I create will, play in a similar way. So I have to try and think about different strategies, different ways of playing, but they will always have this character. So playing against Sun Wukong for China's War will be a bit like playing against me, maybe with a little bit of you in there now. So that's how it is, I think. And it's hard as well. So some designers don't realize this, I think, when they come to design a solo system, that you need every single decision to be made for you, and that's hard, because if you've designed a game, it seems obvious. It seems obvious you should do this or you should do that, but we need to give this precise instruction for how to do it. So it's a lot of fiddly work, and there's often little things which I forget about or miss or something like that. But it's an interesting challenge, and you learn a lot about the game itself by doing it. You need to really understand the game very well. So that's something I quite enjoy, even if it can be hard work and sometimes quite difficult to do as well.
Yeah, I've been enjoying this myself, and I'm glad that after having played and tried all these different coin volumes, that all this experience comes into play when designing the non-player faction. Because I think in order to design a faction for a coin volume, you have to be a somewhat experienced coin player from all possible aspects, like knowing how to play a coin faction or an insurgent faction and how to adapt to situation and try to make this adaptable to a new coin volume, which bears its own challenges. Like China War is a different one, and there's a different balance in all that. To be honest, China War has got a very new kind of 3 versus 1 style. Like I think I have not seen it in other coin volumes. Like you've got Japan, which invades China, and you've got 3 factions that are pretty much allied to each other, and for the most part they cannot attack each other except for some subvert or so action. Yeah. But for the most part, it's a 3 versus 1, which I have not seen again, and it kind of resembles an operational war game with all this management of troops and trying to pick your correct battles to take and calculating your risks and your possible casualties and attrition throughout the war. So what is your take about this new style of China, or how do you like this 3v1 style?
So yeah, those are 2 very unique kind of challenges. I mean, one of them, the first one is a little similar to People Power, which is kind of a 2v1. So we had some similar kind of challenges there where we had to, if we made all 3 of those factions go against each other in equal amount, then the government would win every time. And, similarly in China's War, if everyone targeted each other the exact same amount, then it would always be one faction winning. The Chinese factions need to work together a little bit, particularly the warlords and the nationalists. For the CPC, they can kind of just do their own thing, which is what they did in the war as well. So that's that's okay. But yeah, it's tricky, and we had to try and put in some of that cooperation between the 2, particularly for warlords and nationalists. And I think that's worked out okay now. So they'll kind of try to keep enough forces together to do things sometimes, but like more often the warlords will go off and do something else, which I think works. So that leaves it more to the nationalists to try and fight the war to some extent. But that was very difficult. And the other thing that's hard, as you say, is the conventional aspect of it. So you get a little bit of this in Fire in the Lake, with the NBA and the US fighting against each other in the Ardennes. And that was a challenge there as well, particularly in the Fall of Saigon expansion. But this one, a lot of the game is about that. And a lot of it is about getting, as you say, calculating how many forces to deploy onto the LOCs, when to assault, what kinds of losses you can take. And I'm not sure we've really perfectly solved that for the non-player mode, but there's at least some attempts to do that, and the bots will make some kinds of decisions here. At the end of the day, so one of the kind of compromises we make is if you're playing solo, the aim isn't for any particular non-player faction to win, really. It's just to make sure that the player doesn't win. So it's okay if some of them behave kind of suboptimally, so long as they make it hard enough for the player to win that it's a good challenge. And then if you're playing with 2 players or 3 players and using one of the bots or the non-player factions to fill in, again, in that case, I'm no longer so concerned about stopping a player win. It's more about just adding some additional friction is how we talk about it. So it's just to kind of mix things up a bit so that the game is more interesting for the players, really. So they've got something else to think about other than just what the other players do. Particularly for a 2-player game. Yeah, and we played 2-player, I think, 3 or 4 times now, which was quite an interesting thing to do. I think it works okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting what you just mentioned, that it's really different when it is a human player solo versus the rest of the factions being bots. And then in comparison to if it is 2 or 3 players who just need a bot faction to fill the gap of the human player. Yeah. In the solo experience, the goal is just to make it a little bit challenging for the human player. Yeah, what I also like about a successful bot system design is that it, to some extent, it teaches you how to play the game efficiently. Like if you are new to the coin games and you look at the decision, the bot, like the decision-making progress and what are the criteria and the thought process of the non-player, you kind of learn how to play the game itself and what are the goals that you want to pursue in the situations in which you want to adapt. So, okay, before moving on, so one final thought, how do you think our collaboration was? How did you feel about working together for the system?
It was great. It was really good. You had a lot of kind of dedication and focus. You were also willing to be critical, which is really important, sometimes very critical. So you come in with all these problems, which is great because sometimes people when they're testing a game, just want to play it and they don't really have much more feedback beyond that. But you really cared about trying to make it work well and had lots of good thoughts, some more positive ideas too. So some ideas about how to fix something like this or that. And yeah, just getting consistent games from you, consistent feedback was extremely helpful. And then playing those games together so we could try the 2-player mode. Like really, you were the perfect tester, I would say. So it was fantastic to have your help there. How was the experience for you? I know there were some bits which were maybe harder from your perspective.
Well, yeah, from my perspective as well, it was a very enjoyable experience. It was my first playtesting experience, so I was glad to have kind of accumulated all this coin game experience from previous volumes before jumping into that. And yeah, I might have been a bit more critical than I should like. I mean, for the first part, I was like, okay, that's a beautiful design. Then I was like, you know what, there could be a lot more ideas that could be implemented. And then I started bringing in one idea after another, maybe. But yeah, at some point we came to a compromise, and the final result, I think, will be enjoyable to players out there, which is the main goal. So my next question would be like, how different is it to be a developer than a designer? Like, you have been developing a lot, and now I think it's time you make your first big design.
Yeah.
So how was it like from the first thoughts, like when you got the idea into your mind and trying to make it a solid game with all this developing experience of yours, please?
So I actually began as a designer, and well, I got a full first version of my design for the Pure Land finished before I became a developer. So my introduction to this world was working on the Pure Land, which is my coin game, which will come out after China's war. I was working on that really just as a hobby, just as a fun idea. I thought it'd be nice to see if I could make this game work. And I began posting about it on Twitter a bit, about the progress, and it was quite nice. I didn't need to contact GMT. I was actually contacted by Jason Carr at GMT because he'd seen me writing about it and was interested, which felt nice, very kind of flattering. And then I sent that over to him, and he was impressed, and we decided to take it. And then while I was doing that, he asked if I wanted to help test some games. So I began testing Fall of Saigon first, which was a really good experience. I think similar to you. So I came in with lots of enthusiasm, lots of ideas, thought there were lots of problems with it. So there was lots of kind of critical thoughts I had, and I pushed back a bit and we worked on that. I think I was, similar tester to you. There was one moment I played Fall of Saigon maybe 10 times in a row, just doing the same tactic, which seemed like it might be a bit broken. Just did it over and over again, kept sending Jason more feedback just to kind of convince him about this thing. And then we made a change to the game because of that. So I had a similar attitude to you, and that impressed Jason, I guess. And I ended up working. So he said he was looking for somebody to do more development work and invited me to start doing that. And then I was continuing to work on the Pure Land as I began working as a developer. So I think the experiences I was learning working on other people's games helped me work more on the Pure Land. And actually at the start, I was developing just Steven Rangazas's expansion Sovereign Discord for Fall of Saigon, and he was the developer for my game. So we worked with each other, kind of working on each other's designs. And so working with Steven is almost more like co-designing, I think, for both of us. So he's almost a co-designer on my games and I'm a co-designer on his games. So that's one end of what it's like to be the developer, where you're really closely working with the designer. It's a very kind of close partnership. It's similar when I work with Fritz Abel as well. But then for other games, there's lots of other games I now work on as a developer where it's much more hands-off. You don't necessarily have so much creative input, but it's about trying to understand what the designer wants to do. So you need to understand their vision. And then even if you disagree with that a bit, try and help them get there. So work out what kind of game they want to make. Lots of the games which I work on aren't necessarily my favorite kind of game, but I can help the designer make it work for what they want it to be, and what lots of other people do as well. I have my own tastes. Other customers have different tastes. And that's fine. So that's the other end of the development. And then at that end, I describe it. So, when I'm describing what I do as a job to people, I say it's like being an editor for board games, which is a little bit right. So I do lots of work editing the text and making it clear and so on. But it's really more like being, I would say, more like being a project manager, because you also need to manage the project and talk to different departments. So it's a great way to learn a lot about the board game industry in general. So I know, I have to work with artists, I have to work with production, so I know what kinds of issues there are there and so on. So it's good for learning about that. And then there's still this core part of it where you're working on the design ideas themselves. So you need to help them with that. And that then helped me work on my own stuff. But yeah, I would say that my earlier designs, so like the Pure Land, which even though it's not out yet, was kind of finished a few years ago now. That's been less influenced by my work as a developer. And I'm trying to resist going back and changing it because it's just kind of done now, But I would like to try and have more time to work on more designs in future as well. And that's something I'm trying to, make time for in my life, to do more design work too. I think ideally I would maybe work 4 days a week as a developer, because that's how I pay the bills. And then 1 day a week do some design work, try and get more designs out in future. But yeah, it's been really helpful as a designer, certainly, just to learn more about different kinds of games and about how games are made and everything.
I say, yeah, and I think we can all agree that in order to be a good designer, you have to be being a playtester or a developer or whatever, or co-designer, all of this, or just a gamer, an experienced gamer, of this.
So I would, I think my number one tip for anyone wanting to get into game design, firstly, just try and make a game. Just do it, just try and play it, see how it goes. You need to do that. But I would really advise you to do some playtesting, because I think you can learn so much about the whole process and about how it works. So get really in, be kind of a really committed playtester like you were and like I was. And that just gets you a lot of experience, and you learn, you kind of see the inside about the kinds of problems there are with games as well. And then you can approach your own game with that same kind of mindset, even though it's always hard to see the problems with your own work, but you can at least take some of that same attitude towards it. And it maybe makes it easier. Sometimes it's hard as a designer to take negative feedback about your designs, but if you've been the one giving that to other people, you can think about it in a more neutral way and think they're just giving the kind of feedback to me that I would give to other people as well.
Yeah, sure. Definitely both positive and the negative feedback helps. And I would say negative feedback helps a bit more because it focuses just on the root of the problems that you might like to improve.
Exactly.
So now you've got the chance to focus on your own ideas and not really be hindered by some other designers' views and goals. So Pure Land it is. The full name is Pure Land, Onin War in Muramachi, Japan, 1465 to 1477.
It's quite a long title.
It might be a long title with all the coin volumes possible. But could you tell us a bit more about this? I would like to see Pure Land being introduced, like the thematic of it and the style of it and the different mechanics, please.
Yeah, so it's a slightly obscure topic, but I think still quite interesting because people enjoy this kind of feudal Japan setting. But it's just before the period people know more of. So the century after the Onin War is called the Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period. And this is where exactly. This is when you get, towards the end of it, you get Oda Nobunaga rising up and, taking that, leading up to Sekigahara, which I think I see on your shelf behind you, this kind of thing. So that's about 100 years later. And this war is sometimes described as the beginning of this period, but it's a shorter time frame. And it's basically a civil war between two factions, so the Hosokawa clan and the Yamana clan, and they're competing to control the shogunate. So the old shogunate, the Ashikaga, doesn't really have much power anymore. They're just people who kind of rule the country in name only. And there's a succession crisis, and one side sides with the young son of the old shogun, and one sides with his brother, who's been put in charge, basically. So there's this civil war going on, and that's quite a conventional civil war, so not really the obvious topic for a coin game. But what I found fascinating when I began to research this period is at the same time, you have two other things going on. So you have quite widespread unrest. So you have all these peasant uprisings, which are called ikkis, which is translates as something like a league. So you have these kind of peasant leagues, not necessarily the poorest peasants, but often the slightly richer peasants who have some land and some kind of interest in the area. And they band together as a kind of local defense force, often just to stop rival armies causing trouble to them, or for other reasons like this. So you have this going on. And sometimes kind of local nobles, local samurai will join them as well, because they don't want to get involved in the civil war. So you have this peasant unrest, and then you also have the rise of the Ikuiki, which is one particular league who become much more powerful later on in the Warring States period, and they're a kind of radical Buddhist sect, so a religious movement. So they're a kind of militant wing of the Jodo Shinshu, which is the true Pure Land Buddhism, and they have this interesting theological teaching, which I could talk about for hours, but I'll avoid going into. But the basic idea is they have this very simple teaching, which will appeal to the kind of poor, undertrodden peasants. And it's also a simple teaching which suggests that you don't need to follow earthly law. You only need to follow the law of Buddha. It allows them to kind of rise up in a more militant way. So you get these Ikuiki uprisings as well going on, sometimes in league with local nobles again. So these two things made me think actually this is a quite interesting kind of topic for coin, and also the kind of general social unrest and widespread economic damage. So the war ends after about 10 years, mostly just because both sides are really exhausted. So a large amount of the fighting takes place in Kyoto, in the capital city. There are conflicts elsewhere, but a lot of it is in Kyoto. They end up literally digging trenches, fortifying buildings and castles in the city, and just hunkering down there for almost 10 years, occasionally raiding each other, sending fire arrows and things. The whole city is burnt down during this period. And then really just because there's no strength to carry on the war, it ends in the end. But it ends in a way which means both of these families have been weakened so much that they can't really hold on to power anymore. And you get these new lords rising up, which in the game are the G samurai faction. So they're not the peasants as such, but they're the kind of lower class samurai who can take advantage of this. And then also the Ikuiki becoming more powerful. And that's the basic setting. And I just thought it was a really fascinating period with lots of interesting stuff to explore.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess you can't have a beautiful Japanese themed game without a succession crisis. So that's exactly the recipe for success. So what I have been hearing so far is, I think, pretty different from what I have experienced in the rest of the coin volumes. So as a kind of decently experienced coin player, what could someone see in common with other coins, and what would be different? And is there any particular coin volume with which you would like to compare Pure Land? And then what would be the different, a new mechanic or thing?
So one thing it's got, which is still very common to coin, is it's got support and opposition. But there's a twist on this, which is that it's support and opposition for the shogunate, so for the Ashikaga shogunate. And that means that both the Hosokawa and Yamana clan have an interest in maintaining support. So there's this twist where they're fighting the civil war, but they want to fight the civil war in such a way that they don't completely turn everyone against the shogun, which is what happened by the end of the war. Basically, everyone said, this war is so stupid, we just don't even care anymore, So there's a different dynamic there where they're fighting each other, but they're both trying to build support at the same time. Whereas the Ikuiki are trying to build opposition because this is a little bit of a simplification, but they're broadly against the kind of rule of the shogun insofar as they think everyone should just be kind of devout Buddhists and focus on that. They basically think that the end of the world is coming in some sense. This is an evil time, so any earthly law is going to be corrupt, so we should be opposed to the shogun, So that's quite similar to coin. You've also got control, but again, this is just between the Hosokawa and the Yamana, so they're fighting for control and territory. You've got pieces which flip up, like kind of guerrilla pieces you might have, but they work quite differently. And it's closest perhaps to All Bridges Burning or to the protesters in Gandhi and People Power. So the pieces which flip are actually peasants, and they're not controlled directly by any faction, and they don't, fight against control or anything. But then when there's a local peasant revolt and an Iki, they all flip over, and now they can fight and they contest control and everything. And a key twist here is that the peasants are also the source of income for everyone. And it's a little bit like the prosperity cubes in Pendragon, but it's like if the prosperity cubes could fight you, So you're taking money from the peasants and you're turning them into your soldiers to some extent. But sometimes they'll have these uprisings and then you can't use them anymore. They'll be loyal to the Ikuiki or to the G samurai. The monks of the Ikuiki work in a similar way. So they're peaceful when they're face down and then they're violent once they're flipped up. So that's kind of something which will confuse new players, perhaps, but or players' experience with the coin system, less so new players. So that's maybe a bit like Pendragon in some ways. The third thing, which is very new, is as well as support and opposition, there's this clan loyalty. So the Hosokawa and Yamana are fighting for loyalty from the clans. And this is like a whole nother layer that's on top of the map. I describe it as a political geography. So rather than there being, rough terrain or jungles or mountains, for the Hosokawa or Yamana, it's whether or not the local clan is loyal to them or loyal to the enemy. And that changes as the game goes on in various ways. And that's probably the most confusing factor for people. But I think once you've played once, it becomes quite easy to understand. Yeah. Yes. And it's on this track on the side, but then it kind of corresponds to the different regions. My general feeling with it is it's going to be more confusing for experienced coin players than for new players. It's kind of different enough. So it's got the normal sequence of play. That's fine. That's standard. Nothing funny going on there. It's got cubes. You fight each other, things like that. So lots of it will be easy enough to understand, but then some of these different rules are a bit unusual.
So where are we in terms of progress? Is it close to completion possibly, or what?
It's yeah, good question. It's done from my perspective. I finished the design of the game. It's done, and people have been really enjoying playing it. So I've committed to not making any big changes. It would be very tempting to go back and redesign loads of it now that I've got more experience a few years on, but I think I just have to leave it as what it is. People like it. I've also finished the solo mode. It needs maybe a bit more testing, and I might ask you to help out with that in future, but I have it all done, ready to test. And in some ways, it's a simpler game than China's War, I think, or at least a bit more straightforward in terms of what the bots should be doing. So I'm hoping that will be fairly smooth. We need a little bit more work on that, but not too much. And then it's just a matter of getting art, and it should be the next coin game to get art after China's War. So we need to find somebody to make the map, and I have some ideas for what this could look like and this kind of stuff. But if, once that process starts, it should be finished quite quickly.
Okay. So my next question would be about the game that is included in both our shelves. I mean, I see British Way back there, and you can possibly see behind me. So this was a very unique experience for me when I touched it, because, everybody would like to introduce the coin system to some more casual gamers while going easy at them and having an introductory step for them to learn the system. So how did you first feel when you joined the British Way team? Like, how did what was your first feeling, and how did the whole process go of developing British Way?
So this one I've been involved with right from the start. So like I said earlier, the designer Stephen Rangazas is a good friend of mine who I work with closely on a lot of projects. So he approached me with the idea for doing this multi-pack and this idea for the topic, and I was really interested. I thought it sounded great. I'm from Britain myself, and I thought these topics are things which I didn't know that much about. We don't really learn about them in school, even though they were quite recent and still quite important today. So it was a good opportunity for me to learn more about them and to maybe help other people learn more about them, because I think they're really important and something we need to talk about more. And then it's just always a real joy for me to work with Stephen on a new game, a new little system, because he came up with this whole new 2-player coin system basically for these games, which I think is very different, very unique, very interesting. And I work closely with him, going back and forth on some aspects of how the sequence of play works, and then how each individual game worked. We would play them together, we would play them solo, change some bits and so on. And that was probably the first time I've worked so closely with a designer, and it was a really enjoyable experience to be that closely involved with it. And yeah, it's great. And they're probably the games I'm most proud of that I've worked on so far. I think they're all really brilliant, and as you say, simple enough to introduce to new players, although still with a lot of interesting depth to them. I would hesitate to say they're good introductory topics, just because the topic material itself is quite difficult. The kinds of events depicted are quite unpleasant in some ways, and I wouldn't want to just throw that on anyone. But if someone's interested, then it's a really brilliant way to learn more about these topics and about the coin system in some ways. Again, like it's not the ideal introduction to the 4-player coin system, but if you play the Malaya game, you learn about control and support and opposition and all these kinds of things. So I think you can learn quite a lot from doing so.
Yeah, I have to confess to you that Malaya is the favorite scenario of both for both me and my gaming partner. This is the one we play most frequent. What about you? Which was your favorite one?
Yeah, good question. I think originally Palestine might have been my favorite. I think the way the Haganah track interacts with the Ugin is really interesting, and I think gives some really interesting decisions for the Ugin about when to begin using more violent terror attacks and this kind of thing. So that was my favorite. I like Kenya as well quite a lot. I think it's the most radically asymmetrical, perhaps, of all of the coin games. You have this extremely weak faction against the very strong British, and I think that's an interesting puzzle for both sides to try and deal with. But this has changed for me recently because we've been working on the expansion for the British Way, and that includes a new module for each game. And that's changed how they all work quite a bit. And I really like the new Malaya module, and I really like the new Cyprus module. So I think Cyprus was probably the weakest of the games out of the box, and we actually did release a small kind of variant for it to address some problems. But with the new module from the expansion, I think Cyprus is just as strong as the others. So it's been nice to kind of revisit them and work on some new ideas and things which we cut from the original design, and I'd love to show you those sometime if you're interested. We could
Yeah,
take a look at them together.
Sure, yeah, pleasantly. And yeah, I would like to try and possibly this enemy of my enemy expansion, with all these new beautiful features.
Yep.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to know is that, yeah, for us in Greece, yeah, Cyprus might be generally the most beloved scenario because it is close to us and it even bears the symbols and names of the Greeks or Cypriots who fought for Cyprus back then. And one last note would be that, you mentioned about events and the cards possibly being unpleasant, and I will answer to you that there is two kind of players. There is one kind of players that will enjoy the thematic or possibly be touched by it or possibly be interested in learning more about it.
Yeah.
And the other kind of players is the kind of gamers, like in the narrow sense of that, like full-fledged the gamers who don't even look at the pictures of the card and just want to learn the game just learn the game. So I think in that sense, British way is a good introduction because you can just play the game, which is a light one, and be introduced into the system without caring all too much about the rest. So any other projects that you are touching right now or working on?
Yeah, I can look at my little board, which has all my projects on. But there's a few we're close to finishing. China's War we already talked about. We're finishing up Cross Bronx Expressway, which is for the Irregular Conflicts series. That's about kind of economic and housing issues in the Bronx. Very different kind of game. That one I'm really excited about. It's very different, very unusual. So it'll be nice to see how it goes. Also finishing Baltic Empires, which is a really, really cool game. It's not quite like this, but a little bit like the kind of game like Hero Stand, where you have a bunch of players and you can backstab and talk to each other and so on. But quite a simple system, which makes room for the player dynamics to be the main focus of it. That one's really good. And the other one we're finishing right now is Bell of Treason, which is a small CDG similar to Red Flag Over Paris and Fort Sumter. So that one's nice about the Munich crisis in Czechoslovakia. So it's by a Czech designer, so it has a very kind of local perspective, which is interesting on that. So those have been most busy in my mind, occupying me a lot. Today, though, I was working on Echo from the Dark, which is the next Irregular Conflict series. So this is the series that takes some coin ideas and goes in a new direction. And that one, I was making some changes to the player factions today and trying out some new ideas. So that's another one where I work quite closely with the designer, Adam Blinkentop, he was the developer of Red Dust Rebellion as well, which just came out, and he's working on this new design. I'm working with him on that. And that's nice because we meet every 2 weeks and we go back and forth with some ideas and some new things. And I've been working on those today. So that's one of the ones I'm most busy with and most excited with, I guess.
I see. So yeah, definitely a pleasant part of the process of changing ideas back and forth. And you mentioned the Irregular Conflict series, and I think you also have been working on Vijayanagara, right? You were included into that. So a few words to introduce Vijayanagara or possibly the whole series to new players who are possibly reluctant or hesitant to jump directly into the coin series because they were intimidated by seeing their friends trying fire in the lake for hours, possibly.
So we were talking about good introductions to the coin series, and I think actually both Vijayanagara and also a Gest of Robin Hood are both good entry points, both thematically and in terms of the length and weight of the game. So they only take 2 hours or so max, 2 or 3 hours longest. So they're not too long. They're quite simple in some ways, quite straightforward rules, but they teach you some of the same dynamics of the coin series. And that's kind of the idea with these early entries in this new series anyway, is that they'll be slightly lighter games which take some ideas from a coin series and introduce some new ideas, move further away. And as the series goes on, we're going to be moving further and further. So Cross Bronx Expressway and Echo from the Dark are both more different and maybe a bit heavier in some respects, but taking basic design principles from the coin series but going in new directions. And what we were finding is that there were so many ideas people were having about coin type games that it was almost too much for one series, and it was getting too different as well. So there, it was changing lots of stuff. So yeah, it's an exciting kind of new thing to explore, and there's some other potential future designs I've been looking at to include in that series as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and to be honest, I've been noticing that myself. Like right now, after all these coin volumes and the new ideas and themes implemented, I mean, thinking back into what Volko started back then, it's like he invented a whole new kind of games, not just
exactly.
like games that you cannot compare with anything else. I don't want to play particularly a war game or a Euro game or whatever. I just want to play a coin series, and that's probably a new kind of era into board gaming with coin series. Now, yeah, everybody wants to take this into another direction and try their own ideas, and there's so many interesting topics to talk about when it comes to insurgencies and counterinsurgencies, and even the history learning part of this is pretty interesting. So you also mentioned the Gest of Robin Hood, and I think this was your first work with Fred Serval, I think the French...
I worked, so actually when I just started working for GMT, I did a little bit of work on his first game, Red Flag Over Paris, but that was really just some final editing, so not really proper development, just helping with the finalization. So yeah, Gest of Robin Hood was my first with Fred. We did have, I have it here actually, we did have... I helped him with a small design, a very civil whist, which we released for PunchCon last year, which is a British gaming convention. That was just a free game that was given away. They're now doing a more full version of it. So technically, I guess that was the first game I worked on him with, but we were working also on Robin Hood at the same time already. And Fred, as I said, is another one of these designers I work very closely with. We talk most days and discuss our design ideas quite often. So that's, he's a fun guy to work with. Quite a personality, as you may have seen on his various social media and video enterprises.
Yeah, I hope we can see more from him in the near future. And I think Robin Hood is a particularly pleasant theme. I mean, coming out of all of these counter-insurgencies and conflict series, I think there's a very big bunch of players who would like to introduce themselves into this kind of game system through Robin Hood, because it's so pleasant. Like we were children and watching Robin Hood, and I think this thematic would possibly help a lot.
Yeah.
So would you say you have a favorite game or a coin game or game mechanic that you like in the series? One that particularly has been touching your interest in the series, possibly?
Yeah, so I mean, if we ignore the games I've worked on, which is cheating, I think my favorite of the other published ones is probably Fire in the Lake. I think it's the best example of the core coin system. So, the first 4 games maybe in the coin series are truest to the original kind of vision that Volko had. And I think of those ones, Fire in the Lake is the best. I think it's really excellent, really polished. I did work on the prequel expansion for it, which I think is also very good. But even just the base game, I think is fantastic. So that's probably my favorite of the coin game. I have a real soft spot for Pendragon, which I think has got lots of issues, but it's one of the earliest I played. I find the history interesting, and I find the economic system in it, I think, is really interesting. And that's what I took inspiration for my own design. This idea that you can, warfare and raiding and so on will damage the economic value of a province. And I think that's interesting, and it makes us think more about the consequences of what's happening. And I think that's important and valuable. So that's one that I have a real soft spot for, I would say, of those two. More broadly, if we go into other games, at the minute, I've been playing, just completely out of nowhere, I've been playing War of the Ring quite a lot, the Tolkien game, the Lord of the Rings game, which I think is just a really fascinating game. I know Volko is a big fan of it as well. So that one I've been enjoying playing. Because I can't help myself, I've begun thinking about some different new design ideas for it. So I've been tinkering with some ideas for, variants for the game and so on, just because it's fun. That's how I first got into designing, was just experimenting with changing other people's games a bit. So that's what I've been enjoying working on recently.
Yeah, and I have also been enjoying War of the Ring, and the best part about it is that I don't even like Lord of the Rings. Like,
really?
I publicly confess it, like I have not been watching the series, but I still like the game because I think it's a relatively simple war game or card-driven game, and all the necessary elements are there. You've got the combat, you've got the sieges, you've got the movement and the dice rolls and modifiers, and I mean, this is a wargamer's dream. Like, this is where everybody would possibly like to start his journey into wargame. A very old game, and possibly one of the top-rated word games
I think it's number one. I think it's number one in war games on PGG, which is funny. People think it's going to be some East Front World War II game or something, but no, War of the Ring, number one in war games, because it's just got such a wide appeal, right? So as you say, people who like Lord of the Rings might like it. People who don't like Lord of the Rings but enjoy this kind of strategy game can enjoy it. I think it even looks a little bit like Risk or Axis and Allies when you see it with all the models. So somebody who grew up playing these simpler games might come in and see it and think, whoa, okay, this is like when I was a child again, something to enjoy. And it's a great game.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound funny to you, but if I had to compare War of the Ring to one other game, I would compare it to Hannibal and Hamilcar by Mark, because what I find common, okay, besides the asymmetry of the two factions, is that you have to adapt to the leader that is leading your faction. Like it's different when you have Legolas or whichever character leads the fellowship and the companions possibly, but in the same way that in Hannibal the Romans are led by a different general or consul with a different ability, and this is how you have to adapt your game plan and goals. That's why I oftentimes compare these two games, although thematically it's very different. I'm more like the history guy, and the other one is a nice fantasy story about the Lord of the Rings. So I've also noticed some movement around Cuba recently, like the Resisting Revolution expansion. So to let other people know, Cuba Libre has been one of the oldest coin games volumes, and possibly a very good one to be introduced into the coin system. It is relatively a light coin game. And now the Resisting Revolution expansion is under works possibly, and it covers the period from 1959 to 1962, if I'm not mistaken, which includes Fidel Castro's new government going towards the Cuban Missile Crisis. So one last thing is that you have been working on it, so you are the right person to ask a few more details about. So how different is it from Cuba Libre, and what is this new style of coin? What should we expect from it? And finally, how is the whole thematic of it, like going into the Cuban Missile Crisis, implemented in the game?
So the main 4-player game, so it's got some other bits too, but the main 4-player game is, it's got the same 4-player sequence of play, but otherwise it's completely different. It's just a completely new game. So it's not like Fall of Saigon or Sovereign of Discord for Fire in the Lake, where you could just learn the new rules and then carry on playing. This one, really, you just need to read the whole new rulebook and learn again, because it's a very different situation. It's not a continuation of the war. The first kind of revolution war finished, and now it's this new situation. It does take some ideas from Sovereign of Discord. So it's got these two external factions. So you can play as the US or the Soviet Union, and you don't have very many pieces on the board, and you have a kind of junior ally who you're trying to get to do what you want to do. So if you're the Soviet Union, you're working with the new Cuban government, and if you're the United States, you're working with the kind of rebels who are fighting against this government. But yeah, it's very different. It's got quite a lot of what you might call Chrome, so little rules just to do different things. And I would recommend it for people who played Cuba Libre a lot and enjoy it, but want something new and different. So it's kind of like a different game you can play with your existing set. There are rules to integrate it a little bit with the base game, so you can play Cuba Libre, and then depending on your result, you move to the next game. Although, of course, we need to assume that Castro does win, or else we just have a different situation. But there's some variations depending on how this goes. So he wins, but if the syndicate wins in Cuba Libre, then there's going to be more US business interests having some influence. So that will help the US player in the next game. So you can play a little campaign thing. But yeah, very different game. The government faction and the resistance faction are the most familiar. So they work kind of like a normal coin government faction and a normal coin rebel faction, except that the resistance is very weak. So they don't try and fight for control or anything, because there was really only very small cells in the cities and some of the countryside fighting against Castro. So they have different kinds of things they can do from there. But it's a little bit, it's a bit like I was saying about Kenya in that regard. It's an experiment in seeing how weak we can make the rebels compared to the government and still have a game that's interesting. A bit like that. And then the other two work very differently. So as the US, you're just infiltrating these cells in to try and cause trouble. And as the Soviet Union, I had the hardest time with the Soviet Union, because you need to try and figure out what they wanted. What were the Soviet Union trying to achieve in this period? And at one point, the game went on until 1963, so until Kennedy gets killed. But I had to stop it at the Bay of Pigs crisis because not the Bay of Pigs crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, because after the missile crisis, the whole Soviet posture towards Cuba just changes completely. They've finished this period. So I had to figure out what the Soviet Union wanted up to the missile crisis. And the way I see it, they're kind of using Cuba as a tool to try and get concessions out of the US. So they're trying to basically intimidate the US enough to get what they want elsewhere. And they did get things. This is often missed, I think. They got missiles taken out of Turkey, things out of Italy. So they got some concessions from the US. They maybe even achieved what they wanted in some ways. People see the Cuban Missile Crisis as a big victory for Kennedy. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think they didn't want a war in Cuba. They just wanted to posture there to get something. So that's what their objective is about. They're trying to get these missile bases into Cuba while keeping US escalation down, basically. So they're trying to sneak in things in and then get this big presence there, which they can scare the US with, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask me,
it's hard to say. Yeah.
If you would ask me who was the winner, I would say de-escalation, possibly. Like this would be the real winner after mutual exchange of, missile transfers, de-escalating the conflict, possibly.
Yeah.
Funny thing is that in our few games where I have been playing Cuba Libre with my gaming partners, it has been anything but Castro's insurgencies. Like it has been either the government ruling the place or possibly directorializing or syndicate winning, but we have yet to see a good Castro. So maybe this is a story for the future. We have been writing a very different history in our gaming sessions. So are there any future plans of yours for possible future designs that you are thinking of right now after finishing your current work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have some old design ideas I was working on and I might revisit, but I think it would be probably better for me to work on something new and I need to work out what that is. I've had some interest for a long time in looking at industrial actions, so strikes and these kinds of things in workplaces. And one topic in particular I was looking at is the miners' strike in the UK in the 1980s. So there's this big strike against Margaret Thatcher in the UK with the coal miners, which is a huge, important cultural moment in the UK. I'm not sure it's interesting enough for an international audience necessarily, but it's something I find really interesting and it's had a big impact on people I know and the country I know. And I actually met with a local friend of mine, Darren, who's been working on some similar ideas to discuss recently. So he's got better ideas than me for this, so I may just let him work on this design. But that's a topic I'm interested in, and I would like to try and come up, I guess, with a good system for looking at industrial action and strikes in a war game kind of context. So coming up with a way to simulate these struggles, which takes some of the tools from wargaming, maybe from Coin or from CDGs or some other game systems, to try and make a kind of interesting way to look at this. Because in a way, they are wars. They're conflicts, at least, being fought between workers and the companies and other people involved. Sometimes there's other people involved too. It isn't just as simple as one side and another. So that's a topic I would like to explore more. I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but I'm kind of working on some ideas and experimenting there. I did also another design I would like to come back to. I had a coin design, maybe it should be an ICS design now, about the Scottish War of Independence. So I live in Scotland, so about Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, that kind of stuff. I live in Scotland now, and I lived in Scotland for about 10 years before as well, before I moved back. And I think it would be a really interesting one to explore. And I had a rough version of a design worked out for that, so a kind of 4-player coin style design. But I think maybe I should make it more away from coin, more into something like ICS. But again, that's something I'm quite interested to explore. And the reason I want it to be something kind of like coin is, the obvious way to do it is a 2-player game. So England against Scotland, like the Columbia game Hammer of the Scots, it's one of these block war games they have. Yeah. Something like this. And that's fine. But I think there's actually a lot of internal tensions on the Scottish side. So Robert the Bruce was actually originally working with the English king against another pretender to the throne. And this might sound like a similar theme because it's quite similar to my other game about succession crisis in Japan, right? So it's again looking at the kinds of civil wars you get when there's a succession crisis for the King of Scotland in this case. So that's one I wanted to look at because I think it's got some interesting political themes. It's a little bit more like something like Robin Hood, where there are these nice myths and these nice kind of legendary figures you can look at as well, which is fun. So that's one I might come back to.
Yeah. Okay. And good luck if you will, if you actually do this. And albeit a bit late, I would like to clarify for our viewers that when we're talking about CDG, this stands for card-driven games, and We mean games that are driven by cards and their events or their operations value. So you use the card and decide on what to do. This is a very big and successful, genre in games. And Scotland would be a nice and interesting one. I agree. And we have both. We have all been watching movies about
exactly.
the Scottish War of Independence when we were younger, and there were some epic ones. And now that you mentioned the Hammer of the Scots, and it crossed my mind that recently there has been a digital version of it for Rally the Troops. What is your opinion about the digital transfer of the games? Is it possible for our genre of coin games and the rest being gradually introduced into digital platforms? Or in the other hand, would it work in a negative way against buying the physical copies and trying to play the game in physical form while you can get the easy solution of having the computer and the platform doing the rules stuff for you? So what do you think about it?
I tend to think in terms of sales, it's probably a net positive. So it gives a lot more people a chance to try the game, and the kinds of people who will buy the game anyway often enjoy having the physical product. They enjoy how it looks, and it's nice to not be on a computer and things like this. So I think it's a positive for that. It can be good for the game itself sometimes. So, we have Gest of Robin Hood now on Board Game Arena, and it means there's way more people playing it. Lots of these people would never have bought it anyway, but they can play it now, and then we get lots of feedback about the game, which is interesting. So we can see what kinds of strategies work and this kind of thing. So that's always interesting to see. You ends up with a very different kind of person playing it. People play it a lot. People play hundreds and hundreds of these games if they're playing online and get a lot of games in quickly. From a personal perspective, I often don't enjoy playing on these rules enforced automation things like Rally the Troops so much. And that's just because I find it harder to learn a game like this, I think. So if I know the game already, it's okay. But it's hard to learn a game because you can kind of just press buttons and then things happen. You don't really understand. And what I enjoy about board games compared to more conventional computer games is that you need to move every piece yourself. So you need to understand what's happening. And I enjoy understanding the whole system and how it works. So for me, I lose a little bit of that when I'm playing digitally. If I already know the game quite well, then it's fine and it's a nice way to play. So I enjoy playing something like Robin Hood or like Andain Abyss, it's on Rally the Troops, and that's quite fun to play because I already know the game well, so that's fine. But if I don't know a game so well, I prefer to explore it with a physical version. And I think for lots of the kinds of people who buy these games, that's probably similar. So they'll enjoy getting the physical copy to play anyway, even if they played it a bit online first, and they might learn more about it, and it might reach a wider audience. Some people might play these games online and then think actually it'd be fun to play with my brother or my family or something, so I'll buy a copy. So I'm in favor of it, even if it's not my favorite way to play always.
Yeah, and I would like to add that, to be honest, I have been enjoying many games online, the most prominent one being Andean Abyss, which we have been playing consistently lately in the platform. And to be honest, I have learned some things that I might have been doing wrong in physical form, and the platform greatly helped me address these issues. And in the other hand, it also depends on how you want to learn the game. Like if it is a manageable one, you can learn it in physical form and practice and experiment in your physical copy. But if it is possibly a game too hard to just grab and try to learn it in physical form, maybe the digital version helps to some extent. So in the recent period, I have been going back and forth into reading and then trying to play Unconditional Surrender in digital form, which is, in my opinion, a quite a complicated system. And I have been reading the rules and then trying to play it in digital form. And then, as you said, at some point, I didn't understand what I was seeing happening in the digital platform. But then I revisited the rules and tried to touch the points that confused me the most. And I'm still in the process. And I think digital platforms are a great way to gradually get over the hardest part of the rules and actually learning the game if you combine the physical studying and the digital experiment.
So one thing that's very interesting, I just want to say, is when we're working with the person making the digital implementation, so like with Tor from Rally the Troops or Franz who did Board Game Arena for us, it's interesting as the designer and developer because they'll have all these questions sometimes for things that aren't actually very precise in the rules, because when they're making the digital one, they need everything properly done. Like I was saying earlier, when we make the non-player system, it has to tell you literally every step that happens. And sometimes they come to us with questions and we think, oh, actually, that wasn't really explained properly in the rules. It could be like this or it could be like that. And then we need to make a choice for the digital version, which was maybe a little bit vague for the game itself. Sometimes there's a rule which can be interpreted one way or another way, and that's fine because it's really a small thing. But for the digital version, it needs to be pinned down exactly. So it forces us to say this. And, in a way, if we had the time and money and everything to do a digital version early in testing of a game, it would force us to make everything much clearer. That isn't really going to be a realistic thing to do because it takes a long time to do. But it's interesting that we have to be much more precise when it comes to doing this. It's a good experience.
I think this would be a very valuable lesson for designers, trying to see their games being introduced in digital form, and what are the rules issues and the rule implementation issues in digital form. This could teach them a way to better and more concisely explaining the rules through possibly the booklets or even the game design itself. And I have noticed myself that there are these rules questions that will only arise in your 100th game. I mean,
exactly.
After you play it 100 times, no matter how well you tried to cover everything, these rules questions will come, and these issues will come at some point. So it requires a lot of practice, and possibly by many different people around the world posting their questions here and there. And after this whole steps and process, after people have been consistently asking the same question about fiddly rules in possibly Board Game Geek, and then designers themselves answering, at some point the games will be ready for their digital launch possibly. And the last topic I would like to touch for tonight is your field of studies, as I have noticed, is related to philosophy. And, you are kind of trying to draw parallels between board games and real life situations or real life wars possibly. So this is, in my opinion, amazingly interesting. And I would like you to tell us a bit more about how did you start this whole process, and any conclusions or thoughts that you have come up with so far.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. Like, I worked until 4 years ago. I worked in philosophy. Well, only 2 years ago actually. I worked in philosophy. As an academic, I was in Germany working at the university there, and then I got this chance to work in board games, and that's something I've always wanted to do since I was young. So it was a great opportunity, which I took in the end. But I've been surprised by how close of a connection there is between some of these things. So particularly the work I used to do, I worked kind of looking at understanding what scientific theories and scientific models are and how they relate to the world. So what does it mean for a scientific model to be about the world? And then, of course, that's kind of what some war games are trying to do. They're trying to be models of conflict or a particular kind of dynamic. And even more generally, I worked in studying complex systems, and a board game, even that's not about the world, is really a kind of complex system. And you have these interacting dynamics between different parts of the system. So that way of thinking has actually been much more helpful than I thought it was. And it's allowed me to continue some of my interests from my academic studies into board gaming. I've moved maybe from science to more like history or social studies or something, but still I'm looking at how these things model the world and how to make sense of that as a relation and how to think about complex systems. Yeah, so there's been a nice connection, I think, between those two things, certainly.
Yeah, I'm kind of laughing right now because I also like, history and watching, the news and even current or ongoing or recent wars. And when I play some certain board games like Mark Herman's Empire of the Sun, I think it is a little bit more difficult to play the game than actually finding the war itself at some point. So definitely some good parallels to draw between the board games and the real life situations. So, Joe, at this point, I would like to thank you once more for joining us tonight. And good luck in whatever you do, your new develops or designs, and good luck with the Pure Land in particular. I'm pretty sure it will be a successful coin volume. And I will be glad to be working with you in whichever projects there is a chance to. And we can join digitally and play some games here and there some times and exchange our ideas. So once more, thank you. And good night. Although I don't know if it is night at your place. Here it is.
Pretty much.
Night.
Yeah, it was getting dark, I think, while we talked. So, but yeah, thanks very much for having me on the show. It was really great to talk and really interesting. Thanks very much.
Okay. So big shout outs to viewers out there. Try our new games and new designs. I mean, Joe's designs, of course, like Pure Land and then China War being launched. They will be launched soon. Stay tuned. We'll be there to play and discuss. Have a good night, everyone.